The bus station bench was made of hard, blue plastic, shaped in a way that was never meant for sleeping. It was bolted to the floor, cold and unkind. She sat there, a woman in a faded green jacket, her arms wrapped tight around a small, half-empty duffel bag. She had become part of the station itself, like a statue people walked past without seeing. 3 days. That's how long she had been there. The first day, she still had hope. She had a little money then, just enough for a cheap sandwich and a bottle of water. She thought maybe someone would be kind, or a solution would appear. But nothing happened. The second day, the money was gone, and the hope started to fade. She drank water from the public bathroom tap, her stomach a tight knot of hunger. By this, the third day, she wasn't thinking much at all. She was just existing. Her name was Elena, but no one here asked for it. Her eyes, once bright, were now dull and fixed on the cracked linoleum floor. They saw the passing shoes, sneakers, work boots, fancy heels, but they didn't really see the people. Her mind was far away, lost in a storm of bad memories. She thought of her younger brother, his laugh, and then the terrible silence that followed his accident. She thought of her own mistakes after, the job she lost, the friends who drifted away, the final, desperate decision to get on a bus, going anywhere. Now. Anywhere was this bench. She would doze off, but never really sleep. Her head would nod forward, then jerk back up as a voice announced a departure for a city she'd never visit. The station was never truly quiet. At night, the cleaning machines hummed, and the lights stayed harsh and bright. During the day, it was a river of noise-crying babies, rolling suitcases, snippets of loud phone conversations. She learned to shrink into herself, to make her body small and unnoticeable. A security guard in a uniform that was too big had stopped by her the first evening. "Ma'am, you can't sleep here," he said, not unkindly. She just stared at him, her eyes empty. He shifted on his feet, uncomfortable. "You gotta have a ticket to stay in the seating area." She didn't move. He sighed, a long, tired sound. "Just don't cause any trouble, okay?" He walked away, and he hadn't bothered her since. She was just another piece of the station's sad furniture. The hunger was a constant now, a deep ache. But worse than that was the feeling of being completely, utterly invisible. People sat on the other end of her bench, put their bags between them as a wall, and then left. A mother pulled her child closer when they walked by. A young couple laughed, their happiness feeling like a physical thing she couldn't touch. She was a ghost in her own life. On the afternoon of the third day, something small broke inside her. A little boy, maybe 4 years old, dropped his stuffed toy rabbit near her feet. He looked at her, his eyes wide and curious. She slowly bent, her body stiff, and picked it up. She held it out to him. His mother swooped in quickly, snatched the toy, and pulled the boy away without a word, wiping the toy on her jeans. The message was clear. You are not safe. You are not clean. You are not one of us. Alina's hand dropped back to her lap. She looked down at her own hands. They were dirty, her nails chipped. A deep shame, hot and heavy, washed over her. This was what she had become. This was the end of the road. She closed her eyes, not to sleep, but to try and disappear. What she didn't know was that she had been seen. A man had noticed her. He came to the station every Tuesday and Thursday for supplies. He was a rancher, a man who spent more time with animals and weather than with people. He had a quiet way of watching, of understanding things without words. On Tuesday, he saw a woman sleeping awkwardly on the bench. He thought nothing of it. On Thursday, he saw her again, in the same clothes, the same hollow look. His brow furrowed slightly. On Saturday morning, he came back. He bought a coffee from the stale-smelling cafe and sat at a different bench, reading a feed store catalog. But his eyes kept drifting to her. He saw how she hadn't moved, how her duffel bag seemed to have gotten flatter. He saw the security guard look at her and shake his head. He saw the mother pull the child away. The rancher finished his coffee. He was a practical man. He had a small, empty cabin on his property that used to be for hired help. It needed work. The roof leaked a little in the far corner. The front porch needed new paint to stop the wood from rotting. He had more work than he could handle alone lately. He watched the woman for another 10 minutes. He saw no anger in her, no danger, just a deep, tired defeat. He saw something else, too, a resilience. Even broken, she was still here. She hadn't given up entirely. She was clinging to this hard bench, which meant she was still clinging to something inside herself. He made a decision. It wasn't a grand, emotional decision. It was a rancher's decision. There was a job that needed doing. There was a shelter that wasn't being used. Here was a person who needed both. He stood up, his knees giving a soft pop. He walked toward the main doors, past her bench. Then he stopped. He turned around and walked back. He didn't stand in front of her, which felt like a threat. Instead, he sat down on the very far end of the same blue bench, leaving a big space between them. He put his old feed store catalog beside him and looked straight ahead, out the dirty window at the parking lot. He sat there silently for so long that Elena finally sensed his presence. She opened her eyes, her body going stiff. Another person to tell her to move. But he didn't look at her. He didn't speak. He just sat, as still as she was. Finally, his voice broke the space between them. It was low and rough, like stones rubbing together, and so quiet she almost didn't hear it over the station noise. "Bench is harder than it looks," he said, still looking ahead. Elena didn't respond. She held her breath. Another long pause. He took a slow breath. "I've got a cabin," he said. "Needs paint on the porch. Inside sound. Has a bed, a stove." He finally turned his head just a little, not quite looking at her, but in her direction. "Work is honest. Shelter is honest. You look like you could use both." He let that hang in the air. He wasn't selling it. He was just stating facts. Then he said the 3 words that would change everything. He didn't say, "Come with me," or "Come to my place." He looked at her, met her exhausted eyes with his own steady, calm gaze, and whispered, "Come home." The words didn't sound like an offer. They sounded like a truth she had forgotten. A tear, the first in days, escaped from Elena's eye and traced a clean line through the dust on her cheek. She didn't speak. She couldn't. Her throat was too tight. After a moment that felt like forever, she simply nodded, just once. The rancher gave a small nod back. He stood up, picked up his catalog. "Truck's out front," he said, and started walking, not checking to see if she followed. He knew she would. Slowly, her joints protesting, Elena stood up. She picked up her duffel bag. She took one last look at the hard blue bench, then turned and followed the quiet man out of the station, into the light of a new day. The old truck smelled of dust, warm leather, and coffee. It rumbled to life with a sound that was more a deep shake than an engine noise. She sat in the passenger seat, her duffel bag on her lap like a shield. She stared straight ahead through the windshield, watching the bus station, the town, and then finally the open fields slide past. She didn't speak. The man beside her didn't seem to expect her to. He drove with both hands on the wheel, relaxed but steady. The silence in the cab wasn't empty or awkward. It was the kind of quiet she imagined existed in wide open spaces. After about 20 minutes, he reached over without looking and popped open the glove compartment. Inside was a brown paper bag, folded neatly at the top. "Peanut butter sandwich," he said, his eyes still on the road. "Made it this morning." Got an apple in there, too. Her stomach clenched at the words. Hunger had been a dull background noise for so long it felt normal. Now, the mention of real food made it roar to life. She hesitated, her manners from a different life warring with raw need. "Go on," he said, a simple permission. She opened the bag. The sandwich was on plain white bread, cut in half. The apple was a deep red, firm and cool. She ate the first half of the sandwich slowly, trying to be polite, but the taste was so good, so simple and real, that she finished the second half quickly. She ate the apple down to the core. He didn't comment, just gave a small, almost invisible nod. The road turned from pavement to gravel, and the truck kicked up a cloud of pale dust behind them. They passed rolling hills dotted with clusters of trees and cows that looked up, chewing slowly as they went by. The world out here was painted in different colors, browns, faded greens, the bright blue of the sky. It was so different from the gray and fluorescent light of the station. Finally, he turned down a long private drive marked by a rusty mailbox. At the end stood a simple ranch house, low and long, with a wide porch. A few 100 yards beyond it, nestled near a clump of cottonwood trees, was a small cabin. It had a sad-looking porch and a chimney made of river stones. The truck stopped in front of the main house. 2 dogs, one old and lumbering, one younger and spotted, trotted over. Their tails wagged in a slow, welcoming beat. They didn't bark. "This is the main house," the rancher said, finally turning to look at her properly. His face was lined from sun and wind, but his eyes were a clear, calm blue. "My place? That," he pointed toward the small cabin, "would be yours. If you want the job." He got out of the truck. She followed, her legs stiff. The dogs came up and sniffed her knees, then lost interest, wandering back to a shady spot. He led her to the cabin. The key stuck in the lock, and he had to jiggle it. The door swung open with a creak. The inside was one room. It was clean, but plain. There was a metal frame bed with a thin mattress, a small wood-burning stove, a table with one chair, and a few empty shelves. A door in the back led to a tiny bathroom. A single window looked out toward the trees. Sunlight streamed in, showing dust motes dancing in the air. It was quiet, so profoundly quiet she could hear her own heartbeat. "It's basic," he said, standing in the doorway. "The roof's good. The stove works. The well pumps out back for water. It's cold in the winter, but it's dry." To her, it looked like a palace. It had a door that locked, a bed that wasn't a plastic bench, and a silence that felt peaceful, not lonely. "What's the job?" she asked. Her own voice sounded strange to her, raspy from disuse. He walked back out onto the porch. "Paint this," he said, running a hand along a flaky, white railing. A gallon of paint and a brush were already sitting there, covered in a thin film of dust. "Then we'll see. Fences always need mending. Animals always need feeding. Garden out back needs weeding." He wasn't giving her a list of chores to trap her. He was stating facts, the endless cycle of work on a place like this. It was work with a visible result. You painted a porch, and you saw it become clean and white. You fixed a fence, and it stood straight again. He pointed to the main house. "I eat at 7 in the morning, noon, and 6 at night. You're welcome. Or there's a hot plate here, if you prefer." He paused, considering her worn clothes. "There are some old things in a trunk at the foot of the bed. Might fit, might not." And with that, he seemed to be done. He tipped his hat slightly. "I'll be in the south pasture if you need anything before supper." He turned and walked toward a waiting tractor. The dogs falling into step beside him, she stood alone on the cabin's porch. The vastness of the ranch spreading out around her. The openness was terrifying. At the bus station, the world was closed in, loud and busy. Here, the world was huge and still. There was nowhere to hide, but also, she realized, no one to hide from. She stepped back inside the cabin. She put her duffel bag on the table. She opened the trunk he'd mentioned. Inside were folded flannel shirts, a pair of worn but sturdy jeans, thick socks. They were clean and smelled of cedar. For a long time, she just sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the quiet. She heard a bird call, the distant low of a cow, the wind in the trees. No traffic. No announcements. No hum of strangers. Finally, she stood up. She changed into one of the flannel shirts and the jeans. They were too big, so she rolled the sleeves and the cuffs. She walked back out to the porch. She picked up the paint can, pried it open with a stick that was lying nearby. The paint was a bright, clean white. She stirred it slowly, the stick making a thick, sucking sound. She dipped the brush. She started on the far end of the railing. The paint went on in a smooth, glossy stroke, covering the old, gray wood. It was a small action, a simple physical thing. But as she made the second stroke and the third, a feeling rose in her chest that she hadn't felt in years. It wasn't happiness, not yet. It was purpose. With every stroke of the brush, she was no longer the woman on the bench. She was the woman painting the porch. And for now, that was enough. The sun was warm on her back. The only sound was the soft swish of the brush and the wind. She painted until her arm ached, and the shadow of the cottonwood tree grew long across the fresh, white wood. The rhythm of the ranch was slow, but it never stopped. The sun, not an alarm clock, became her guide. She woke when the sky turned from black to gray, the air cold enough to see her breath in the little cabin. The first few mornings, she lay in bed, listening to the unfamiliar silence, waiting for the station's noises that never came. Then she would remember the work. The porch was finished, a clean white ribbing around the cabin. The rancher had inspected it one evening after supper. He ran a hand along the smooth rail, nodded once, and said, "Good, holds the weather back." That was the highest praise she could imagine from him. The next job was the fence. He took her out in the truck to the west pasture, where the wire was sagging between crooked posts. He showed her how to use the post-hole digger, the heavy clamps, and the wire stretcher. The tools felt foreign and heavy in her hands. He demonstrated once, his movements efficient and strong, sinking a new post into the hard earth. "It's not about being fast," he said, wiping sweat from his forehead with a bandana. "It's about being solid. The fence has to last through winter storms." Then he left her there with a canteen of water, a bucket of tools, and a pile of new posts. "Do what you can," he said, and drove off toward the barn. The first hour was pure frustration. The digger bit into the ground, then hit a rock. She wrestled with it, her soft hands blistering. The wire seemed to have a life of its own, fighting her, snapping back when she tried to tighten it. A hot, angry tear of frustration mixed with the dust on her cheek. She wanted to quit. She almost did, but there was nowhere to go. So she took a long drink of water, sat on the ground, and just looked at the mess. She watched a hawk circling high above, riding the wind with no effort at all. The wind here was constant. She decided to stop fighting the wire and work with it. She loosened her grip, learned its tension. By the end of that first day, she had only set 3 posts and patched a short length of wire. Her body screamed with new aches. Every muscle she owned was protesting. That evening at supper, a simple stew eaten at his kitchen table, he asked, "How'd the fence go?" "Slow," she said, her voice quiet. He nodded, chewing. "Slow is fine. It's still standing, isn't it?" The next day, she went back. The blisters broke and began to harden into calluses. She found a rhythm. Dig, set, pack, stretch. The work was brutally physical, but it had a clear beginning and end. You could see the line grow stronger, straighter. There was a deep satisfaction in looking back at a section she had fixed, knowing it would hold. Slowly, she started to notice the life around her. Not just the big things like the cows or the hawk, but the small ones. The busy lines of ants near her water canteen. The way the grasshoppers popped away from her boots. The different songs of the birds in the trees at the pasture's edge. At the bus station, life had been a threatening blur. Here it was detailed and specific. She was part of the landscape, not separate from it. The rancher was a man of few words, but he was a careful teacher. He showed her how to feed the small flock of chickens, scattering the grain so the weaker ones got a chance. He taught her to check the cattle's water trough, to clear away the algae with a long-handled rake. He didn't give her big speeches or ask her questions about her past. Their conversations were about tasks. Clouds are stacking up over the mountain, he'd say, squinting at the sky. Better get the hay in the loft covered. Or, the ginger hen is hiding a nest. See if you can find it before the fox does. She began to learn his language, which was the language of the land. A stiff breeze from the east meant a weather change. The behavior of the cows could tell you if a predator was near. The quiet wasn't empty. It was full of information. One afternoon, a week into the fence mending, a sudden summer rainstorm blew in. The sky darkened fast, and the wind picked up, whipping the tall grass. Cold rain began to fall, hard and stinging. She was far from the truck, far from the cabin. For a moment, panic tightened her chest. She was exposed alone. Then she saw him, a tall figure in a dark oilskin coat, walking across the pasture toward her. He didn't run. He just walked steadily through the sheeting rain. He held out a second coat, identical to his own. "This'll keep the wet out," he said, his voice almost lost in the drumming on the grass. She pulled it on. It was heavy and smelled of wax and old smoke. It immediately cut the wind. He didn't lead her back. Instead, he pointed to a grove of pine trees at the edge of the field. "We'll wait it out under there. It's a quick one." They sat under the thick branches, the ground dry and covered in brown needles. The rain roared on the canopy above them, but only a few drips came through. They sat in silence, watching the storm move across the valley, a gray curtain of water. He pulled a piece of jerky from his pocket, broke it in two, and handed her half. They ate, watching the weather do its work. It was the first time she felt like they were on the same side, not as employer and worker, but as two people sharing the same piece of ground under a storm. He had come out to get her. He hadn't left her alone in it. When the rain eased to a drizzle, they walked back together. The air was clean and washed, smelling of wet earth and pine. Her body was tired, but her mind was clear. The frantic, scared thoughts that used to race in circles in the bus station had quieted. They were replaced by practical things: the smell of the rain, the weight of the coat, the remaining stretch of fence. That night, after a supper of eggs and fried potatoes, she didn't immediately go back to her cabin. She stood on the porch of the main house, looking at the stars, which were unbelievable out here, like a thick dusting of salt on black velvet. He came out and stood beside her, lighting an old pipe. The sweet smell of the tobacco mixed with the night air. "Thank you," she said, the words feeling both too small and enormous. "For the coat, for coming out there." He puffed on his pipe, the ember glowing in the dark. "Couldn't have you rusting," he said, a dry hint of something like humor in his voice. Then he added, more gently, "A person shouldn't be alone in a storm." He went back inside. She stayed for a long time, looking up. The vastness of the sky didn't feel scary anymore. It felt honest. She was small, but she was part of it. She had a place to wait out the rain. For the first time in a very, very long time, she felt safe. The work settled into her bones. It was no longer something she did just to earn her keep. It became the shape of her days. Her hands, once soft and idle, were now mapped with scratches and calluses, the nails kept short and practical. She could heft a bale of hay, fix a stubborn gate hinge, and predict the afternoon rain by the way. The morning clouds hugged the mountain ridge. She found a strange peace in the routine. Every morning, she would walk from her cabin to the main house, the spotted dog now trotting alongside her, its tail a happy metronome. Breakfast was always oatmeal, strong coffee, and sometimes a slice of thick bacon. They ate in a comfortable quiet, listening to the radio's low mumble of market reports and weather. One morning, he pushed a small, battered ledger book across the table to her. "For the garden," he said. Inside was a list, written in his careful, blocky handwriting. Tomatoes, green beans, zucchini, lettuce, carrots. Plots out back, gone to weeds. It's yours if you want it. Seeds are in the shed. The garden plot was a tangle of last year's dead plants and stubborn grass. It looked impossible, but she remembered the fence and the porch. She started the same way, slowly. She spent a whole day just pulling weeds, her hands in the dark soil, the sun warm on her back. The earth smelled rich and alive. She found worms and beetles and a family of surprised field mice. She didn't kill them, just let them scurry away. Turning the soil was hard work. The old fork would bite deep, and she'd lift and turn, breaking up the clods. It was a different kind of tired than the bus station. That tired had been a hollow, dizzy feeling. This was a solid, earned fatigue that promised good sleep. She planted the seeds according to the packet instructions, making little rows and patting the soil gently over them. It felt like a hope buried in the dirt. Every morning, her first stop was the garden, checking for the first green spears to break through. One afternoon, while she was watering the new seedlings, a truck she didn't recognize came rattling up the drive. A man got out, about the rancher's age, but louder, with a booming voice. He was a neighbor from a few miles over. "Heard you took on some help." The neighbor called out, eyeing her with open curiosity. As she stood by the garden hose. The rancher walked out from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. He nodded. "I did." The neighbor's gaze swept over her, taking in her worn work clothes, her tied-back hair. It wasn't unkind, just deeply curious. "That so? Need a hand out here that bad?" There was a pause. She felt her old shame prickling at her neck, the feeling of being judged, of not belonging. She braced herself for an explanation, for some story that would make her presence make sense to this stranger. The rancher looked from the neighbor to her, then back. His voice was calm and final. "She's fixing the south fence, and she's got the garden going again." He said it as if that explained everything, as if her work was her name, and it was all anyone needed to know. The neighbor considered this, then grinned. "Well, the south fence has been an eyesore for years. Good luck to you, miss." He tipped his hat to her, and the conversation moved on to talk of cattle prices and a shared piece of equipment. She stood frozen for a moment, the hose still running in her hand. He hadn't defined her by her past, by her brokenness, by the bench. He had defined her by her work, by what she was building, not what she had lost. The relief that washed through her was so powerful it made her eyes sting. She was just a person fixing a fence. It was the most ordinary and the most wonderful thing in the world. That night, as they shelled peas on the porch steps, she broke the quiet. "That man today, the neighbor. You didn't tell him. About me, where I came from." The rancher tossed a handful of empty pods into a bucket. wasn't his business. He looked out at the darkening pasture. A man is his work. That's all that matters out here. You're doing the work. It was the closest he had come to giving her a true compliment. It filled a space inside her she hadn't known was empty. Days turned into weeks. The garden exploded in a way that amazed her. Tiny green beans hung in clusters. Tomato plants grew tall and needed staking. She learned to pinch off the suckers, to water the roots and not the leaves. She began to eat from the garden a crisp carrot, pulled straight from the ground, a sun-warmed tomato eaten like an apple, its juice running down her chin. She started cooking simple meals for them, both in the main house kitchen, using what she grew. A fresh salad, beans simmered with a bit of bacon, a zucchini sliced and fried. He always ate it slowly, finishing everything, and would say, "Good," with a nod. It was enough. One evening, after a supper of her vegetable soup and fresh bread, he didn't get up from the table right away. He sipped his coffee, then looked at her. "The garden's doing better than it has in 10 years, he said. He paused, as if weighing his words. "The cabin. It needs a proper step. The old one's rotting. There's good wood in the barn. You could build it." She met his gaze. He wasn't giving her an order. He was offering her a permanence. Building a step wasn't like painting a porch or mending a fence. It was an improvement. It was putting down a foundation. "I'd like that," she said, her voice steady. "Good," he said. And for the first time, she thought she saw the faintest trace of a smile in the corners of his eyes. It wasn't a smile for show. It was a smile of recognition. He saw her now, not as a ghost from a bus station, but as the woman who fixed fences and grew beans and could build a step for her own door. That night, walking back to her cabin under a sky full of stars, she didn't feel like a visitor. She felt like she was walking home. The word he had whispered to her on that hard bench home. It wasn't just a place to sleep anymore. It was the soil under her nails, the fence lines she had straightened, the rows of green in the garden, and the quiet respect in an old rancher's eyes. She had arrived with nothing but a hollow duffel bag and a broken spirit. Now she was building something. She was building a step. And after that, who knew? The work was never done. And for the first time, that thought filled her with hope. Not dread. The summer heat began to soften, giving way to the cool, clear nights of early fall. The garden, her proud first project, was now a treasure chest of late harvest. She pulled up fat orange carrots and dug for potatoes, their skins thin and delicate. She gathered the last of the tomatoes, some still green, to ripen on the windowsill. The work felt different now. It wasn't about survival or proving herself. It was about stewardship, taking care of what was now, undeniably, hers to tend. The step for her cabin was finished. It was simple and solid, made from salvaged barn wood she had planed smooth. She would sit on it in the evenings, watching the bats swoop over the pasture, a cup of tea in her hands. The spotted dog would often lie at her feet, sighing with contentment. She felt a quiet pride when she walked up and down it, a feeling that was new and sturdy inside her. One morning, the rancher found her in the barn, organizing seed packets for next year. "We're bringing the cattle down from the high pasture today," he said. "It's a big job. Could use an extra set of eyes." This was different from mending a static fence. This was working with living, moving animals. She felt a flutter of nervousness, but nodded. They rode in the truck up a winding dirt road that climbed the foothill behind the ranch. The view from the top took her breath away. She could see the whole valley, the patchwork of pastures, the cluster of buildings that was her home, the ribbon of the river. It was a world away from the cramped, noisy bus terminal. The cattle were a scattered herd of dots against the yellowing grass. On horseback, two of the rancher's occasional hired hands moved among them, gently urging them into a loose group. Her job, he explained, was to stand at a specific gate in a fence line lower down, to make sure the herd turned in and didn't stray down the wrong draw. It's about being a calm presence, he told her, dropping her off by the gate. They're nervous about moving. If you're nervous, they'll feel it. Just stand firm. Be a post they have to go around. He drove off to help the riders, leaving her alone by the open gate. For a while, there was nothing. Just the wind and the vast, empty landscape. Then, she felt it first through her boots, a low, rhythmic rumble in the earth. Then she heard it, a growing thunder of hooves and a chorus of deep moans. Then she saw them, a river of brown and white hides and dust flowing down the hillside toward her, guided by the riders on the flanks. Her heart hammered against her ribs. They were so much bigger up close, a powerful, collective force. The old fear, the one that told her to run, to hide, to make herself small, rose up in her throat. She wanted to step back from the gate, from the wave of sound and motion, but she remembered his words, be a post. She thought of the fence she had built. It didn't run from the wind. It stood and held the line. She planted her feet more firmly on the ground, straightened her shoulders, and took a deep breath. She didn't wave her arms or shout. She just became still and watchful. The lead cow's approach.